Before we begin, I'd like to give a big shout out to the Taller Boys on YouTube for helping me make this video. So in the last episode, we talked about the ways to play the killer most effectively, the perk builds that I use, and the perks of the killer themselves. So this time, we're going to talk about ways that we could potentially rebalance and use this rebalanced killer to its most effective. So when I was talking to the Taller Boys on YouTube, they recommended a change in the coloration of the trap to make it slightly more gray or brown to blend in more to general. But my suggestion to the game was make it to the order to disarm the traps, there is a small skill check. Disarm the trap with only a noise notification and no aura reveal for the trap that got disarmed. And on top of that, you can make it to where, similar to wiggling, there was two smaller on the side, and if you hit 3 of those, it'll disarm the trap, but show the aura of the trap that got broken. I was thinking as well that they could make it to where when you fail one of these disarms, then you'd be trapped inside of the trap. It wouldn't do any damage to you, but you'd still be out. I was recommending, instead of a 25% change in the chance of escape, change it to a 33% chance. So rather than 1/4, it's a third chance to escape. Now, with this improved killer, there's a lot more opportunities for smarter plays in both using the flanking capabilities of your speed mixed with the placement of your traps to make it to where the survivor has to choose where to go very carefully instead of just instantly disarming a trap like they can now. I think this big brain play would be quite useful and make the killer both fun and slightly more complex. But I think that the devs could think of far better ways to utilize this than I could, so I would leave it up to them to decide all the little nitty-gritty aspects of it. As for all of the hints that I didn't go over in the last video, I would recommend placing your traps in spots that obscure its vision more. It's especially true in spots with high grass, under windows, or sometimes even outside of lockers would work if you know a survivor went in. And especially if you think that they might have head-on, you can use that as a backup plan. This is more situational than I'd think, but it's funny to trap a survivor inside of a locker. I'm kind of sad that I didn't get the footage of that one, but it was pretty funny. I don't know how practical a lot of these rebalances would be, but I do think that they would add another layer of depth to the killer. And if they're not going for those rebalances, I'd say at least make it to where the killer can maybe carry another trap without the use of an add-on. Other than that, I really can't think, because unlike how I said with Huntress, this is a very, very two-dimensional killer. Or unlike how I said with Lesion, it's a very two-dimensional killer. Lesion has so much aspect to grow, but this killer's like Huntress, where there's not much room for actual improvement on the killer itself, because it's just such a straightforward and simple abilities, and that's one of the things that makes it so mindless, and thing that makes most players just not pick them. Players tend to like more complex killers that are not so complex to the point of that they're unfun to play as. So I think that finding a good balance of that would be very nice for this killer in general, because as it stands, it's probably the single most brainless killer in the game. Think of even with characters like Ghostface. You have to know when to activate your stock. With Michael, you need to know when it's most optimal to start your stock and when it is to stop it. But with this killer, it's just place trap here, now I'm done. And that is sad because of the amount of history that this killer has with the game. It is the oldest killer in the game, but also one of the most boring to play because of just how excruciatingly simple and unfun they are. I definitely would like to see reworks that make it to where you can use his trapping capabilities on less of a two-dimensional brainless front, on more of a complex 3D basis. If that doesn't make sense, what I'm trying to say is make it to where the traps actually take skill with their placement and with their the purpose behind them, rather than just using them to block off a Meg's escape in the doorway that she should have seen. Because as it stands, I just really can't stand this killer. All of the other killers are fun to me, even Billy to an extent, because at least he is complex and hard to play. But this killer, man, I don't know what to do with this guy. Aside from the things that I recommended, I think that the devs of this game, being as creative as they are, and far better at balancing than I am, could definitely find something to do with this sad killer. And we've seen them do things that completely redeem a killer in the past. Plague was one of the worst killers before her rework, and now since her buff, she's one of the best, and not to a point that it feels unfair to fight against. I mean, when was the last time that you saw a Plague spitting on somebody for a year just to not do any damage until they get their corrupt purge? As it stands now, the devs have made some decent choices in terms of rebalancing things, and I'd like to see that continue, especially with Trapper, who, as it stands, is a killer that desperately needs a rework. In the words of the Taller Boys, he thinks that it is the single worst killer in the entire game, and while I may disagree with that, I can definitely see where he's coming from. There's not enough options for playstyles with this killer, and there's not enough ways to stop survivors from countering your killer. This just makes it a very, very sad and boring to play killer, because you're doing what other killers can do, but just worse in general. I really don't know, like, how this would hold up with new changes, and whether it'd be completely broken with the changes I suggest, or stay the same, basically. But I would like to see some changes. Until that, make a survivor get their leg caught in a bear trap and one-shot them, and tell them Danny sent ya. One last hidden stat of Trapper I should mention is that you get called out for body camping even if you objectively were not, so that's always really fun.